Jonathan Hale had built an empire on cold precision, living alone in a mansion where every surface gleamed but nothing felt warm. Then, one morning, he discovered his maid's 8-year-old daughter hiding on the kitchen floor, eating leftovers like she was terrified of being caught. That single moment cracked open a memory Jonathan had buried for decades, his own childhood hunger. But in the ruthless world of billionaires and corporate warfare, showing weakness can cost you everything. And when Jonathan's enemies realized that this quiet maid and her brilliant daughter had somehow become the only things he truly cared about, they saw the perfect opportunity to destroy him. What he didn't know yet was that protecting them would force him to choose between the empire he'd spent his life building and the family he never knew he needed. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale mansion, casting geometric shadows across the pristine marble floors. Jonathan Hale stood in his private study, already dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit despite the early hour. At 42, he had mastered the art of precision. Every minute of his day was scheduled, every meal calculated, every interaction controlled. His mansion sprawled across 15 acres of manicured lawns and imported gardens. But inside, the air felt sterile, cold, like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. He glanced at his watch. 6:45. In exactly 15 minutes, his breakfast would arrive on a silver tray, prepared to exact specifications by a chef he'd never actually met. The protein portions would be weighed. The coffee would be precisely 178 degrees. This was how Jonathan liked his world. Predictable, ordered, safe from the chaos that had defined his childhood. But this morning, something felt different. He couldn't identify it at first. Just a subtle disturbance in the atmosphere, like a note played slightly off-key in an otherwise perfect symphony. He moved through the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors, and paused near the entrance to the staff quarters. Outside, a car door closed quietly. Jonathan turned toward the sound, his jaw tightening. That would be Nia Carter, his head housekeeper. She was always punctual, always efficient, always nearly invisible. Exactly how he preferred his staff. But today, Nia wasn't alone. Through the window, Jonathan watched as Nia emerged from her aging sedan, her movements quick and apologetic. She wore her usual uniform, pressed and neat despite its obvious age. Her dark hair was pulled back into a practical bun, and her face held that careful blankness that came from years of working in homes where her presence was tolerated but not welcomed. Beside her stood a small girl, no more than 8 years old. The child wore a school uniform that had clearly been handed down several times. The hem had been let out, leaving a visible line where the fabric had faded differently. Her shoes were scuffed, but polished to the best shine that old leather could hold. She gripped her mother's hand tightly, her large brown eyes taking in the mansion with a mixture of awe and fear. Jonathan felt his irritation spike. This was precisely the kind of disruption he didn't tolerate. His home wasn't a daycare facility. He had rules, systems, boundaries that maintained the order he'd built so carefully. Nia entered through the staff entrance, and Jonathan was already waiting in the hallway when she appeared. She froze when she saw him, her shoulders tensing. "Mr. Hale," she said quickly, her voice steady but apologetic. "I'm so sorry. The school called me last night. There's emergency repairs after a pipe burst. They're closed for at least today, possibly tomorrow. I couldn't find anyone to watch Zara on such short notice, and I couldn't miss work. I promise she won't be any trouble. She'll stay in the staff room. You won't even know she's here." Jonathan looked down at the child. Zara stood partially hidden behind her mother's legs, her eyes cast downward. She looked small for 8, fragile almost. There was something about the way she held herself, as though she was trying to take up as little space as possible, that struck him as oddly familiar. He opened his mouth to say what he always said when staff brought personal problems into his domain. That this wasn't his concern, that arrangements needed to be made, that exceptions couldn't be granted without precedent. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from his executive assistant. The board meeting with Preston Ward had collapsed. The billion-dollar acquisition war he'd been strategizing for months had just taken a sharp turn. Preston had made an unexpected move, and Jonathan needed to respond immediately. The words he'd been preparing died in his throat. He had bigger problems than a quiet child hiding in his staff room. "Keep her out of the way," he said instead, his voice clipped. Without waiting for a response, he turned and headed toward his office, already pulling up financial reports on his phone. Nia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she said softly, but he was already gone. She knelt down to Zara's level, taking her daughter's small hands in her own. "Listen to me carefully, sweetheart. You need to stay in the staff room. You can read your books or do your homework, but you can't wander around. Mr. Hale is a very busy man, and this is his home. We're guests here, understand?" Zara nodded solemnly. "I'll be good, Mama. I promise." Nia kissed her forehead. "I know you will, baby. I know you will." She set Zara up in the small staff room with her backpack and a few books, then began her daily routine. The mansion was massive, and cleaning it properly took hours. She started with the main living areas, moving through rooms that looked more like magazine spreads than actual living spaces. Nothing was ever out of place because nothing was ever really used. Zara sat in the staff room for the first hour, dutifully working through her math homework. But eventually, her curiosity got the better of her. She'd never been inside a house like this before. The apartment she shared with her mother had 2 small rooms and a bathroom where the sink sometimes didn't drain properly. Here, the hallways seemed to go on forever. She slipped out quietly, her small feet making no sound on the expensive rugs. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She just wanted to see. The kitchen was the first room that truly captured her attention. It was enormous, with gleaming stainless steel appliances and marble countertops that stretched impossibly far. But what stopped Zara in her tracks was the food. Trays of it, plates piled with pastries that hadn't been touched, bowls of fresh fruit, perfectly arranged, a whole platter of what looked like some kind of fancy breakfast nobody had eaten, and the staff was scraping it all into garbage bins. Zara's stomach growled so loudly she pressed her hand against it, embarrassed even though no one was close enough to hear. She and her mother had shared a can of soup the night before. It was all they had left until payday, which was still 3 days away. Her mother had given her most of the soup, saying she'd eaten something at work, but Zara had seen the truth in the careful way her mother measured out each spoonful. One of the kitchen staff walked past with another tray of discarded food. Zara watched it go, her mouth watering. There was so much, and it was all just going to the trash. When no one was looking, she reached out and took a single dinner roll from a tray waiting to be cleared. It was still soft and warm. She slipped it into her pocket and hurried back toward the staff room, her heart pounding. She almost made it. "Zara." Her mother's voice stopped her cold. Nia stood in the hallway, her expression pained. She'd seen everything. Zara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry." Nia glanced around quickly, then pulled her daughter into an empty room and closed the door. She knelt down, taking the roll from Zara's pocket and holding it in her palm like evidence. "Baby, I know you're hungry," Nia said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I know, but we don't take things that aren't ours. Even when we have nothing, even when it seems like no one would miss it. Our dignity is all we have sometimes, and we don't give that away. Do you understand?" Zara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just thought, there's so much, Mama, and they're throwing it all away anyway." Nia pulled her daughter close, hiding her own tears in Zara's hair. "I know, sweetheart. I know it doesn't seem fair, but this isn't our world. These aren't our things. We have to be better. We have to be perfect because people like us don't get second chances." She sent Zara back to the staff room with firm instructions not to move, then returned to her work. But her hands shook as she dusted the bookshelves in Jonathan's library. The shame burned at her chest. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. She was raising her daughter in a world where hunger existed steps away from excess, and there was no bridge between them. Meanwhile, Jonathan sat in his office, surrounded by computer screens showing stock tickers and acquisition reports. The call with his board had been brutal. Preston Ward wasn't just a business rival. He was a predator who'd built his empire by identifying weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. And somehow, Preston had found leverage that Jonathan hadn't anticipated. The morning stretched into afternoon. Jonathan barely noticed. He survived on black coffee and controlled fury, making calls and sending terse emails while his carefully constructed plans began to crack. It was after 2 when he finally stood, his back stiff from hours at his desk. He needed to clear his head. He walked through his own home like a stranger, barely seeing the expensive art on the walls or the imported furniture arranged in perfect symmetry. His footsteps carried him toward the kitchen. He didn't remember deciding to go there. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he just needed to move. The kitchen was quieter now, between meal preparations. The chef had left for his afternoon break. Only a few staff members moved through the back areas, their voices low and professional. Jonathan paused, hearing something, a small sound barely audible, a soft clink of metal against ceramic. He turned slowly, following the sound to a corner partially hidden by the large center island. And there, sitting on the floor with her back against the cabinet, was Zara. She had a plate balanced on her knees. On it were the remains of what looked like leftover pasta from yesterday's dinner, along with a few vegetables. She was eating quickly, methodically, her eyes focused on the plate like she was afraid it might disappear. Her small fingers gripped the fork tightly, and every few bites, she glanced around nervously. She was eating like someone who expected to be caught, like someone who'd been hungry long enough to know that food wasn't guaranteed. Jonathan felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, maybe decades. It must have made a sound, because Zara's head snapped up. When she saw him standing there, her eyes went wide with terror. The plate nearly slipped from her hands. She tried to stand, tried to hide the evidence, tried to disappear into the cabinets behind her. What are you doing down there?" Jonathan asked. His voice came out softer than he'd intended, almost gentle. Zara flinched like she'd been struck. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. Please don't fire my mama. Please. It was my fault. I was just so hungry and I thought—" She couldn't finish. She just stood there, shaking, holding the plate like she might need to defend herself with it. For a long moment, Jonathan couldn't move, couldn't speak. He was seeing something that shouldn't exist in his perfectly controlled world. A child, hiding on his kitchen floor, terrified of being punished for eating garbage that would have been thrown away anyway. And the worst part, the part that made his throat tight and his hands clench, was how familiar it felt. "Mr. Hale." Nia's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She rushed into the kitchen, her face a mask of horror. When she saw Zara, saw the plate, saw Jonathan standing there, something seemed to break inside her. She moved between them instantly, putting herself between her daughter and the billionaire like a shield. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale. This is completely unacceptable. I take full responsibility. Zara shouldn't have been anywhere near this area. I'll pack our things immediately. You won't have to deal with this again." She reached for Zara's hand, ready to pull her daughter away from this place, from this life, from this moment that had burned with shame. But Jonathan didn't move. He was staring at Zara, at the way she tried to make herself smaller, at the fear in her eyes that went deeper than just getting in trouble. This wasn't a child who was afraid of punishment. This was a child who was afraid of being hungry again. "When did you last eat?" he asked Zara directly. Nia tried to intervene. "Mr. Hale, please. We don't need—" "I'm asking her." His voice was firm but not angry. He looked at Zara, waiting. Zara glanced at her mother, then back at Jonathan. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yesterday, Mama said she wasn't hungry, so I could have her part." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan felt something twist in his gut. He looked at Nia and saw the truth written across her face. The pride that kept her back straight, even as her world crumbled. The love that made her skip meals so her daughter could eat. The desperation she hid behind professional efficiency. "You're not fired," Jonathan said quietly. "Sit down." Nia blinked. "What?" "Both of you. Sit down." He pulled out chairs at the small staff table in the corner of the kitchen. It was where the household staff ate their own meals, away from the formal dining rooms. Jonathan had never sat there before, had never even really noticed it existed. Nia didn't move. "Mr. Hale, I don't think. Please." The words seemed to cost him something. "Just sit down." Slowly, cautiously, Nia guided Zara to a chair and sat beside her. Jonathan sat across from them, and the distance between his world and theirs had never felt both smaller and more impossibly vast. He looked at Zara for a long moment, really looked at her, saw the way her uniform didn't quite fit, the shadows under her eyes, the thinness of her wrists. She was small for her age, he realized, not naturally petite, small because she hadn't had enough. And something in Jonathan's chest that had been frozen for decades began to crack. He thought about his own childhood, about sitting in a mansion not unlike this one, waiting for his father to decide if he'd earned dinner that day, about the fear that became so familiar it felt normal, about learning to hide in corners and eat quickly, quietly, before someone could take it away. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls to keep those memories out. But looking at Zara, crouched on his kitchen floor with a plate of leftovers, the walls crumbled. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said finally. The words felt strange in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd apologized to anyone. "This shouldn't have happened in my home." Nia's eyes widened. She'd been bracing for anger, for dismissal, for humiliation. "Not this. You don't need to apologize to us, Mr. Hale," she said carefully. "We crossed a line. No." Jonathan shook his head. "I crossed a line by not seeing it sooner." He stood abruptly, and both Nia and Zara tensed. But he simply walked to the intercom on the wall and pressed a button. "Chef Marcus, I need you to prepare a fresh meal." "Huh. Substantial. For a child." He paused, then added, "Not leftovers. Something real." He returned to the table. Nia was staring at him like he'd transformed into someone else entirely. "Mr. Hale, you don't have to." "How long?" he interrupted. "I'm sorry. How long have you been choosing between rent and food?" Nia's face flushed with shame. She looked away. "That's not your concern. It became my concern when your daughter ended up on my kitchen floor. We're managing. You're starving." The word hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Nia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Zara reached out and took her mother's hand, and Jonathan saw the way they held onto each other, like they were all each other had in the world. "I pay you a fair wage," Jonathan said, but even as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. Fair according to what standard? His? The market's? What did fair mean when it still left a child hiding on the floor to eat scraps? "You do," Nia said firmly. "This isn't your fault. Medical bill from last year, some unexpected expenses. We're working through it. We'll be fine." Jonathan wanted to argue, wanted to point out that fine was clearly a relative term. But before he could speak, the kitchen door opened. "Jonathan," he turned to see his sister Evelyn standing in the doorway. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, her blonde hair pulled back severely, her blue eyes sharp and calculating. She held a leather portfolio under her arm. "Evelyn." Jonathan's voice hardened. "What are you doing here?" "You scheduled a meeting to review the merger documents. You forgot." Her gaze moved past him to Nia and Zara, and her eyebrows rose. "Am I interrupting something?" "No," Jonathan said curtly. "Give me a moment." But Evelyn didn't leave. She studied the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd built a career reading situations. A maid and her daughter sitting at the staff table. Her normally cold, dismissive brother sitting with them. The tension in the air that spoke of something more than a simple employee interaction. "Interesting," she murmured. "Evelyn." "Out." His sister held up her hands in mock surrender. "Fine. But we do need to talk. Preston Ward's team filed new paperwork this morning. It's aggressive." She left, but Jonathan could feel her curiosity burning through the walls. Chef Marcus arrived minutes later with a plate piled with fresh pasta, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a side of garlic bread. He set it in front of Zara without a word, though his eyes flickered with questions he was too professional to ask. Zara stared at the plate like it was a mirage. She looked to her mother for permission. Nia's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "What do you say, Zara?" Thank you, Mr. Hale, Zara whispered. Just eat, Jonathan said quietly. He watched as she picked up her fork with trembling hands and took the first bite. Then another. The way she ate carefully, trying to maintain manners, even though he could see how desperately hungry she was, made his chest ache. Nia sat rigid beside her daughter, pride and gratitude and shame warring across her face. Jonathan recognized that expression. He'd worn it himself once upon a time. Take your time, he told Zara. Then to Nia, you don't need to leave early today. There's no rush. Mr. Hale, Jonathan. The correction surprised both of them. When it's just us, you can call me Jonathan. Nia looked at him like he'd grown a second head. In the hierarchy of their world, that was an impossible request. But something in his expression must have convinced her he meant it. Thank you, Jonathan, she said carefully, testing the name on her tongue. From the hallway, unseen by any of them, Mr. Lawton stood in the shadows. The elderly butler had worked for the Hale family for 40 years. He'd seen Jonathan grow from a terrified boy into a hardened man. And now, watching him sit with a maid and her daughter, offering kindness where none was expected, Lawton allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps there was hope yet. Jonathan eventually stood, knowing he had to deal with Evelyn and the Press and Ward situation. But before he left, he paused beside the table. Tomorrow, he said, looking at both Nia and Zara, I want you to bring a list of what you need. Not what you think is appropriate to ask for. What you actually need. Mr. Hale. Jonathan. He corrected again. Jonathan. Nia repeated, her voice thick with emotion. We can't accept charity. We have our pride. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering fairness. There's a difference. He walked away before she could argue further, his mind already spinning with plans and possibilities. But as he entered his office where Evelyn waited with her knowing smirk and her questions, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose beyond profit. Connection beyond contracts. And in his jacket pocket, though he didn't realize it yet, was the small napkin Zara had used. She'd drawn on it with a pen she'd found. A simple picture of 3 people sitting at a table. A tall man, a woman, and a small girl. Above them, in careful childish letters, she'd written, "Thank you for being kind." Jonathan would find it later that night. And when he did, he would sit in his empty office, surrounded by billions in assets and achievements, holding a napkin drawing like it was worth more than everything else combined. Because for the first time in decades, Jonathan Hale felt something crack through the ice around his heart. And he wasn't sure if he was terrified or relieved. The following morning arrived with unexpected warmth. Jonathan found himself waking earlier than usual, not because of his rigid schedule, but because something had shifted in the atmosphere of his home. For the first time in years, the mansion felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where people actually existed. He dressed in his usual precise manner, but paused when he reached for his jacket. The napkin with Zara's drawing was still in the pocket. He'd looked at it 3 times the previous evening, studying the simple figures she'd drawn. The tall man, the woman, the child, all sitting together. He folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer before heading downstairs. Nia arrived at exactly 7, as always. But today, Zara walked beside her with less fear in her eyes. The school was still closed for another day of repairs, and this time, Nia hadn't apologized for bringing her daughter. Jonathan had made it clear the day before that it wasn't necessary. "Good morning," Jonathan said when he encountered them in the hallway. The greeting felt strange coming from him, too casual for his usual interactions with staff. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," Nia replied, though there was a question in her eyes. She was still trying to understand what had changed, what had transformed her employer from a distant billionaire into someone who seemed to actually see her. "Jonathan," he corrected gently, then looked down at Zara. "Did you eat breakfast?" Zara nodded shyly. "Mama made eggs." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "If you get hungry later, the kitchen is open. You don't have to hide anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nia's eyes glistened, but she blinked the emotion away quickly. "Thank you," she said softly. Jonathan nodded and continued toward his office, but his mind wasn't on the dozens of emails waiting for him. Instead, he found himself wondering what an 8-year-old child did all day in a mansion where she was afraid to touch anything. Hours passed in the familiar rhythm of business calls and financial reports. Preston Ward's hostile takeover attempt was accelerating faster than Jonathan had anticipated. His rival was playing dirty, using tactics that skirted the edge of legality. Jonathan needed to respond with precision and speed, but his usual laser focus kept fracturing. Around midday, he stepped out of his office to clear his head and nearly collided with Zara in the hallway. She'd been moving quietly, as if trying not to disturb anyone, and jumped back when she saw him. "Sorry," she whispered automatically. "It's all right." Jonathan glanced around. "Where's your mother?" "Upstairs. She said I could read in the library if I was quiet." Zara clutched a worn book to her chest. "Is that okay?" "Of course." Jonathan studied her for a moment, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Actually, would you like to see something interesting?" Zara's eyes widened with cautious curiosity. "Okay." He led her to his office, a room she'd only glimpsed from the hallway. It was massive, with dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds. But what captured Zara's attention immediately was the wall of monitors displaying colorful charts and graphs. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Business data, market trends, company performance across different regions." Jonathan pulled up his main operational dashboard, a complex web of colored lines and numbers that would have looked like chaos to most people. "See these lines? Each color represents a different part of my company." Zara stepped closer, her eyes tracking the movements across the screen. Jonathan watched her, expecting the glazed-over look most people got when confronted with financial analytics. But instead, her expression sharpened with focus. "The red ones keep going down when the blue ones go up," she said quietly, almost to herself. Jonathan froze. "What?" "Here." Zara pointed to a section of the graph, where red trend lines dipped while blue ones climbed. "And here. And here too. They're like a seesaw." He leaned in, studying the exact points she'd indicated. She was right. The inverse correlation was there, clear as day. It was something his analytics team had mentioned in their last report, buried in 15 pages of technical jargon. But this 8-year-old child had spotted it in seconds. "That's very observant," Jonathan said carefully. He pulled up another chart, more complex. "What about this one?" Zara tilted her head, studying the screen with the same intensity she'd given the first one. "The green numbers are stuck. They're not moving like the others. Is something broken?" Jonathan's breath caught. Those green indicators represented his manufacturing division, which had been underperforming for months. Stuck was exactly the right word for it. His executives had been dancing around the problem with euphemisms like challenging market conditions and temporary plateaus. A child had diagnosed it in 30 seconds. "Zara," he said slowly, "how did you see that?" She shrugged, looking suddenly self-conscious. "It's just patterns. Like puzzles. Mama says I'm good at puzzles." "Your mama is right." The door opened without warning. Evelyn strode in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped short when she saw Zara standing beside Jonathan's desk, both of them studying the monitors together. "Am I interrupting?" Evelyn's tone suggested she knew exactly what she was interrupting, even if she didn't understand it. "We were just looking at some data," Jonathan said neutrally. Evelyn's sharp eyes moved from her brother to the child and back again. "Jonathan, we need to discuss the Ward situation. It's urgent. Give me a moment." He turned to Zara. "Why don't you go find your mother? Tell her you can have lunch in the kitchen. Real lunch, not leftovers." Zara nodded and hurried out, but not before Evelyn caught the small smile that crossed Jonathan's usually stern face as he watched her go. The moment the door closed, Evelyn turned to him with barely contained curiosity. "What exactly is happening here?" "Nothing. She's a child. She was curious about the monitors. You've never let anyone under executive level into this office. Now you're giving tours to your maid's daughter." Evelyn's expression wasn't judgmental, just deeply intrigued. "She's unusual, isn't she? That little girl." "She's intelligent," Jonathan admitted. "And you noticed. That's what's really unusual." Evelyn set her portfolio down on his desk. You've changed since yesterday. I can't quite figure out how or why, but you have. Can we focus on Preston Ward? In a moment, Evelyn studied her brother with the calculating gaze that made her one of the most formidable lawyers in the state. When we were children, Father used to punish you by taking away your meals. Do you remember? Jonathan's entire body went rigid. Evelyn, you never talked about it. Not once, even after he died. But I remember. I used to sneak you food from the kitchen when he wasn't looking. She paused. Is that what this is about? You see that little girl, and you see yourself? This conversation is over. Jonathan, I'm not judging you. If anything, I'm relieved. You've been frozen solid for 20 years. If a hungry child and her mother can thaw you out, then good. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. Just be careful. Caring about people makes you vulnerable. And Preston Ward is very good at exploiting vulnerabilities. Before Jonathan could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Preston Ward's name flashed on the screen. He answered on speaker. Ward. Hale. Preston's voice dripped with false pleasantry. I trust you received my latest proposal. I received your attempted corporate raid, disguised as a proposal. The answer is no. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could resolve this amicably. Preston's tone shifted, becoming sharper. I've been learning interesting things about you lately. Your household staff, for instance. The touching little charity projects you've been undertaking. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Evelyn's eyes widened in alarm. I have no idea what you're talking about, Jonathan said evenly. Of course not. Just be aware that I play to win, Hale. And I use every piece on the board. The line went dead. Evelyn's face had gone pale. He knows about the maid and her daughter. He's going to use them against you somehow. He can't. They're not relevant to the business. Since when does Preston Ward care about relevance? If he thinks they matter to you, he'll find a way to weaponize them. Evelyn grabbed her phone. I'm going to make some calls. We need to know what he's planning. As his sister left, Jonathan stood alone in his office, staring at the screens that Zara had deciphered so easily. The child had a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding complex systems. But she was also vulnerable, trapped in a world that didn't value her intelligence because of who her mother was and where they lived. And now Preston Ward, a man who had built his empire on exploiting vulnerabilities, knew she existed. Jonathan made a decision. He walked to the kitchen where Nia was supervising Zara's lunch. Both looked up when he entered. I need to talk to you, he said to Nia. Privately. Nia's expression immediately filled with worry. Is something wrong? Not wrong. Just complicated. They stepped into the adjacent pantry while Zara continued eating. Jonathan closed the door and took a breath. There's a man named Preston Ward. He's a business rival who's trying to take over my company. Today he implied that he knows about you and Zara. Jonathan watched Nia's face carefully. I need you to understand that this isn't your fault. But Ward is ruthless. If he thinks he can use you to hurt me, he will. Nia's face went through several emotions. Confusion, fear, and finally resignation. We'll leave. Today. You won't have to worry about us being a liability. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Nia's voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through her usual composure. That we're putting you in danger by existing? That we're a weakness someone can exploit? You're not a weakness. Then what are we? The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Jonathan struggled for words. What were they? Not just employees anymore, clearly. But what exactly had changed remained undefined and uncomfortable. You're under my protection, he said finally. That's what matters. Ward won't touch you or Zara. I'll make sure of it. You can't promise that. Men like him, men with money and power, they do whatever they want. People like us are just collateral damage. Not this time. The certainty in his voice made Nia pause. She studied his face, seeing something there that hadn't existed a few days ago. Not just determination, but something closer to genuine concern. Why do you care? She asked quietly. We're nobody to you. I clean your house. That's all. Jonathan wanted to give her a simple answer. Something about responsibility or basic human decency. But the truth was more complicated and more painful than he wanted to admit. When I was Zara's age, he said slowly, each word costing him something. My father used to lock me in my room without meals if I didn't meet his expectations. Sometimes for days. I learned to hide food, to eat quickly when no one was watching, to be afraid of being caught with something that should have been mine by right. Nia's expression shifted from frustration to horror to understanding. When I saw Zara on that kitchen floor, Jonathan continued, hiding with a plate of leftovers, terrified of being caught. I saw myself, and I decided that nobody would ever feel that way in my home again. The silence between them was heavy with shared pain and unexpected connection. Nia's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. I'm sorry that happened to you, she whispered. I'm sorry it's happening to you now. Before either could say more, Zara's voice called from the kitchen. Mama, can I have more water? The spell broke. They returned to their respective roles, but something fundamental had shifted between them. The afternoon stretched into evening. Jonathan worked late, preparing contingency plans for every possible move Preston might make. Evelyn had called with disturbing news. Preston had hired a private investigator to dig into Jonathan's personal life. The man was thorough and unethical, exactly Preston's type. Around 8 in the evening, Jonathan finally left his office, exhausted and frustrated. The house was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. He assumed Nia and Zara had left hours ago. But as he passed the library, he heard a small sound. A muffled sob. He found Zara curled up in a large armchair, her face buried in her hands, crying as quietly as she could manage. Zara, Jonathan approached carefully, unsure how to comfort a crying child. What's wrong? Where's your mother? She's cleaning upstairs, Zara hiccuped. I didn't want to bother her. Why are you crying? Zara looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. I heard you and Mama talking about the bad man who might hurt us because we're here, and I heard Mama say we should leave. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. This is my fault. If I hadn't eaten that food, if I hadn't been here, none of this would be happening. You and Mama wouldn't be fighting. The bad man wouldn't care about us. Jonathan felt his heart crack wider. He knelt beside the chair, bringing himself to her eye level. None of this is your fault, he said firmly. Do you understand me? You didn't cause any of this. You were hungry. You're a child. You should never have to apologize for needing food. But now Mama's upset and you're in danger and I will handle Preston Ward. That's my job, not yours. Jonathan surprised himself by reaching out and gently wiping a tear from her cheek. You know what I saw when I looked at those charts today? Zara shook her head. I saw someone brilliant. Someone who sees patterns that adults miss. Someone special. He paused. When I was your age, I thought I was broken because I was different. Because I saw things other people didn't. Because I was afraid all the time. But I wasn't broken. I was just trapped in a place that didn't understand me. Like me, Zara's voice was small. Exactly like you. Jonathan sat back on his heels. The difference is, you have a mother who loves you enough to skip meals so you can eat. Who works herself to exhaustion to give you a chance. I didn't have that. So you're already stronger than I ever was. Zara stared at him with wide eyes, processing this glimpse into the billionaire's hidden pain. Your dad was mean to you? Very mean. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me who I am. Jonathan stood. Now, let's find your mother and get you both home. It's late. But before they could move, the house alarm suddenly blared. Jonathan's security system was sophisticated and rarely triggered by accident. His phone buzzed immediately with a notification from his security team. What's happening? Zara covered her ears against the loud siren. Jonathan checked his phone, his expression darkening. Someone just tried to breach the perimeter fence. Eastern section. Nia appeared in the library doorway, her face pale. What's going on? Get Zara. Stay here. Jonathan was already moving, his phone to his ear, calling his head of security. Marcus, talk to me. Who is it? Unknown male, sir. He ran when the alarm triggered. We're pursuing now. Jonathan's jaw clenched. This wasn't random. Preston had made his first move, and it wasn't subtle. He was sending a message. I can reach into your home. I can touch what matters to you. Nia gathered Zara close, her eyes wide with fear. Is someone trying to break in? It's handled. Security is on it. Jonathan forced his voice to remain calm, even as rage burned through him. But I want you both to stay inside tonight. I'll have a car take you home when we're certain the grounds are secure. Mr. Hale. Jonathan, he corrected automatically, then caught himself. Even in crisis, the familiarity felt necessary. Please, just trust me. An hour later, after security had swept the entire property twice and found nothing more than disturbed foliage and footprints, Jonathan stood in his office with Evelyn, who had rushed over the moment she heard about the breach. This was a warning, Evelyn said grimly. Preston is showing you he can get close. Next time, he might actually succeed. Not if I get to him first. What are you planning? Jonathan pulled up files on his computer. Months of research his team had compiled on Preston Ward's business practices. I'm going to destroy him. Completely. Legally. But utterly. That could take months. Lawsuits, investigations, regulatory reviews. Then I'll work fast. Jonathan's voice was cold steel. He threatened my home. He scared a child. I will not tolerate that. Evelyn studied her brother with something approaching respect. You really do care about them. The maid and her daughter. This isn't just about winning anymore. No, Jonathan admitted. It's not. That night, after Nia and Zara had been safely driven home in one of Jonathan's cars with a security escort, he stood at his office window, looking out at the dark grounds. Somewhere out there, Preston Ward was planning his next move. But Jonathan was planning too. He thought about Zara's drawing in his desk, the simple figures sitting together at a table. For years, he'd lived in this massive mansion alone, surrounded by wealth, but isolated from any real human connection. He'd told himself it was safer that way, cleaner, more controlled. But control hadn't brought him happiness. It had only brought emptiness. Now, for the first time since his childhood, he felt something more. Fear, yes, but also purpose. Someone needed him. Not his money or his business acumen or his influence. They just needed him, and he wasn't going to let them down. The following morning arrived with ominous clouds gathering over the estate. Jonathan had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing Preston's vulnerabilities and planning his counterattack. He was in his office before sunrise, working with a focused intensity that his staff recognized as dangerous. When Nia arrived at her usual time, alone, Jonathan immediately noticed Zara's absence. Where is she? He asked, meeting Nia in the hallway. I kept her home. After last night, I thought. Nia's voice wavered. I thought maybe she'd be safer there. Jonathan wanted to argue, to tell her that his home had the best security money could buy, that Zara was actually more vulnerable in their apartment. But he understood the instinct. A mother protecting her child in the only way she knew how. I understand, he said instead. But Nia, I need you to know that I meant what I said. You're both under my protection. That doesn't end when you leave this property. How can you possibly protect us from someone like Preston Ward? He has money, power, connections. We're nobody to him except a way to hurt you. Then I'll make sure there's no incentive to hurt you. Jonathan pulled out his phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. By the end of today, I'm going to expose every illegal practice Ward has engaged in for the past decade. I have documentation, proof, witnesses who are willing to testify in exchange for immunity. Nia's eyes widened. You've been planning this? I've been preparing for war with Preston Ward for months. I just didn't have the right motivation to actually pull the trigger. He paused. Now I do. Because of us. Because he threatened what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone made Nia's breath catch. The line between employer and employee, between protector and protected, was blurring into something neither of them fully understood. I should get to work, Nia said quietly, but she didn't move. Jonathan, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, please don't blame yourself. We were fine before we met you. We'll be fine after. That's not true. Jonathan's voice was soft but certain. You weren't fine. You were surviving. There's a difference. Before Nia could respond, Jonathan's phone rang. It was his head of legal. The board meeting was set. The evidence was compiled. The war was about to begin. I need to handle this, Jonathan said. But Nia, after today, things are going to change. Preston Ward won't be a threat anymore. Not to me, not to my company, and definitely not to you or Zara. He walked away, leaving Nia standing in the hallway, her heart beating too fast and her mind spinning with questions she couldn't quite articulate. As the day unfolded, Jonathan unleashed everything he had on Preston Ward. Years of fraudulent dealings, bribed officials, manipulated stock prices. The evidence was irrefutable, delivered to regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and the media with surgical precision. By evening, Preston's empire was crumbling. His stock price plummeted. His board demanded his resignation. His name became synonymous with corporate corruption. But Jonathan took no pleasure in the victory. He'd done what was necessary to protect his company and the people within it. Nothing more, nothing less. When he finally returned home after midnight, exhausted and emotionally drained, he found something unexpected on his desk. A hand-delivered envelope with his name written in careful, childish handwriting. Inside was another drawing from Zara. This one showed a tall man standing between a small girl and a dark, scary shape. The man had his arms spread wide, shielding the girl. Underneath, she had written, "Thank you for being brave. You're like a superhero." From Zara. Jonathan sat in his empty office, holding the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls, accumulating wealth, and isolating himself from anything that could hurt him. But two people, a struggling mother and her brilliant daughter, had walked into his sterile world and reminded him what it felt like to be human, what it felt like to care about something more than quarterly earnings and market dominance. He carefully placed the new drawing beside the first one in his desk drawer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Preston might be defeated, but the world was full of threats to those who dared to be vulnerable. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his mansion that felt a little less empty, Jonathan Hale made a promise to himself. He would never let anyone make Zara or Nia feel afraid again. Not in his home, not anywhere. And he would spend every resource, every connection, every ounce of power he possessed making sure they had the chance at the life they deserved. Not as charity, not as obligation, but as something that scared him more than any business rival ever could. As family. The morning after Preston Ward's empire began its spectacular collapse, the mansion felt different. Lighter somehow, as though a shadow had been lifted from the expensive marble and imported wood. Jonathan stood in his kitchen, watching the sunrise paint the grounds in shades of gold and amber, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He'd barely touched it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying yesterday's events and planning what came next. He'd neutralized the threat. Preston Ward was finished, his corruption exposed to every regulatory body and media outlet that mattered. The hostile takeover was dead. Jonathan's company was secure. But the victory felt hollow, because somewhere across town, in a cramped apartment that probably had leaking pipes and thin walls, Nia was making breakfast for her daughter with whatever groceries she could afford. Zara was probably getting ready for school, wearing that uniform with the let-out hem and the scuffed shoes polished to their best shine. They were still struggling, and Jonathan had the power to change that. The question was whether Nia would let him. When she arrived for work that morning, Zara walked beside her again. The school had reopened, but it was Saturday now, so mother and daughter were together. Jonathan noticed immediately that Zara looked tired, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Morning," Jonathan greeted them, his tone deliberately casual. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," Nia replied, though her expression was guarded. She'd seen the news about Preston Ward. The entire city had, and she knew exactly why Jonathan had launched such a decisive attack. "Jonathan," he corrected again, "can I speak with you for a moment?" Privately. Nia's shoulders tensed. Of course. She settled Zara in the library with her books, then followed Jonathan to his study. He closed the door and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing, her posture defensive. "I want to talk about Zara's education," Jonathan began. "She's enrolled in public school." "It's fine. I'm sure it is. But she's exceptionally bright, Nia. The way she analyzed those business patterns, the speed with which she processes complex information, she has a gift that deserves proper nurturing." Nia's expression hardened. "What are you suggesting?" "There's an academy. Riverside Preparatory. It's one of the best private schools in the state. They have programs specifically designed for gifted students, small class sizes, resources that... No, the word was sharp and final. Nia, just listen. No, she repeated, her voice rising slightly. I don't want your guilt gifts. I don't want your charity. We'll manage on our own. This isn't charity. It's an opportunity. It's you trying to ease your conscience by throwing money at us. Nia's eyes flashed with emotion that had been building for days. You saw a hungry child, and it reminded you of yourself. And now you think you can fix everything with your wealth. But we're not a project, Mr. Hale. We're people, and we have our dignity. The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Who are we to you, really? Nia's voice cracked slightly. Are we employees? Are we friends? Are we some kind of redemption arc for your traumatic childhood? Because I need to know where the lines are before my daughter gets hurt. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of small footsteps in the hallway stopped him. They both turned to see Zara standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and frightened. Mama. Her voice was barely a whisper. Are we leaving? Nia's face crumpled. She knelt quickly, gathering her daughter close. No, baby. We're just talking. Adult stuff. It's okay. But Zara had heard enough to understand the tension. She looked past her mother to Jonathan, her expression confused and sad. Did I do something wrong? No, Jonathan said firmly, moving closer. He crouched down to her level. You didn't do anything wrong. Your mother and I are just trying to figure out how to help you have the best possible future. I don't need fancy school, Zara said quietly. I just need Mama to not be sad anymore. The simple truth of her words silenced both adults. Nia's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back this time. Jonathan felt that familiar crack in his chest widen into something that ached. Let me think about it, Nia said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not saying yes, but I'll think about it. Jonathan nodded. It was more than he'd expected. Take all the time you need. The rest of the morning passed in uncomfortable tension. Nia threw herself into her work with increased intensity, cleaning rooms that were already spotless. Jonathan tried to focus on business, but his concentration was fractured. Every few minutes, he'd find himself thinking about Zara's tired eyes and Nia's fierce pride and the impossible distance between wanting to help and actually being allowed to. Around noon, Evelyn arrived unannounced, as was becoming her habit. She found Jonathan in his study, staring at financial reports without actually reading them. You look miserable, she observed, settling into one of his leather chairs without invitation. Preston Ward is destroyed, your company is secure, and you look like someone died. What's wrong? Nothing. Try again. And this time, don't insult my intelligence. Jonathan set down his tablet. I offered to pay for Zara's education at Riverside Prep. Nia refused. Of course she did. Evelyn's tone suggested this was obvious. You're a billionaire offering handouts to your employee. She probably feels like you're trying to buy them. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to give that child a chance. Maybe, but from her perspective, you're the powerful man who holds her livelihood in his hands, making grand gestures that could disappear the moment you lose interest. Evelyn studied her brother carefully. Jonathan, why do you care so much? And don't give me the line about childhood trauma. That's part of it, but it's not everything. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. When Father used to lock me in that room without food, do you remember what I thought about? I remember you never talked about it. I thought about what kind of man I'd be when I grew up. I promised myself I'd be nothing like him. I'd be strong and successful and completely in control. He paused, but I ended up being exactly like him. Cold, distant, living in a house full of things and empty of people. And now I have a chance to be different, to actually help someone instead of just accumulating more wealth that I don't need. Jonathan's voice dropped. When Zara gave me that drawing yesterday, calling me brave, calling me a hero, I realized I've never been anyone's hero before. I've been feared and respected and envied, but never that. Evelyn's expression softened. You're falling for them. Both of them. That's not romantically, necessarily, though I think that's coming too. She held up a hand to stop his protest. You're falling for the idea of family. Real family. Not blood and obligation, but choice and connection. And it terrifies you because it's the one thing money can't buy. Before Jonathan could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his security team. His expression darkened as he read it. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "Someone filed a report with Child Protective Services. Fusho, claiming Zara is being exposed to inappropriate wealth, possible manipulation, unsafe environment." Jonathan's jaw clenched. This has Preston's fingerprints all over it. Preston's arrested. He can't. His people can. This is retaliation. They can't hurt me directly, so they're going after Nia and Zara. Evelyn stood quickly. "When are they coming?" "Social worker is already en route. Should be here in 20 minutes. Jonathan found Nia in the upstairs hallway, organizing linens. The moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. What happened? Someone filed a complaint with CPS. They're sending a social worker to investigate claims that Zara is in an unsafe environment. Jonathan kept his voice calm, but his hands were clenched into fists. "This is because of me, because of Preston. They're using you to hurt me." The color drained from Nia's face. "They want to take her away from me. No one is taking her anywhere. I promise you." "You can't promise that." Nia's voice broke completely. "I've heard stories. They take children from poor families all the time, especially black families. They look at our apartment, our income, and they see a reason to remove her. And now they'll see that I'm working for a billionaire, and they'll say I'm exposing her to inappropriate situations. And Nia." Jonathan gripped her shoulders gently, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. I will not let them take Zara. I have lawyers. I have resources. I will fight this with everything I have." "Why?" The question came out as a sob. "Why would you do that for us? We're nobody. I clean your house. That's all. Why would you risk your reputation, your standing, for people like us?" Jonathan wanted to give her a logical answer, something about moral responsibility or basic decency. But standing there, watching this strong woman break down with fear for her child, he couldn't hide behind platitudes anymore. "Because you matter," he said simply. "Both of you. You matter to me." Before Nia could respond, the doorbell rang. The social worker had arrived. Her name was Ms. Patterson, a woman in her 40s with a clipboard, tired eyes, and the air of someone who'd seen too much suffering. She introduced herself professionally but coolly, already skeptical. "I'm here to investigate a complaint regarding a minor, Zara Carter, who's allegedly being exposed to an inappropriate environment." "The complaint is baseless," Jonathan said immediately. "And I have reason to believe it was filed maliciously by business rivals attempting to harass my staff." Ms. Patterson's expression didn't change. "I still need to interview the child and assess the situation." She looked at Nia. "You're the mother?" "Yes." Nia's voice trembled. "My daughter isn't in any danger. I'm here working, and she's supervised at all times. I'll need to speak with her alone." "Absolutely not." Jonathan stepped forward. "You will not interrogate this child without her mother present, and you will not imply mistreatment in my home without evidence." Ms. Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hale, I understand this is your property, but I have legal authority to investigate complaints involving minors. You can cooperate, or I can return with law enforcement. Then return with law enforcement. And when you do, I'll have my legal team present. I will not allow you to traumatize a child based on an anonymous complaint filed by someone with an obvious agenda." The standoff lasted several tense seconds. Finally, Ms. Patterson nodded curtly. "I'll be back this afternoon with proper authorization. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you cooperate. Resistance only makes situations like this worse." After she left, Nia collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. "They're going to take her. I know they are. They'll say I'm an unfit mother, that I can't provide for her, that she's better off in foster care." "Stop." Jonathan knelt in front of her chair. "That is not going to happen. I'm calling my lawyers right now. Evelyn will handle the legal aspects. We'll document everything, prove that Zara is safe, healthy, and well cared for. But our apartment, what about it? It's small. The heat doesn't always work. There's mold in the bathroom that the landlord won't fix. They'll use that against me." Jonathan's expression hardened. "Then we fix it. Today." I'll have contractors there this afternoon addressing every issue. And if your landlord has a problem with that, he can deal with me. You can't just. Yes, I can. And I will. Jonathan's voice was steel-wrapped in determination. Nia, I told you before, you're under my protection. That means something. That means everything. Nia stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand you. I don't understand why you care so much. I don't fully understand it either, Jonathan admitted. But I know that watching you and Zara struggle while I live in excess makes me sick. I know that the thought of someone taking her away from you makes me want to burn the world down. And I know that you and your daughter have somehow become the most important part of my life in less than a week, and that terrifies me more than any business deal ever has. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Nia reached out slowly and touched his hand. Thank you, she whispered. The afternoon became a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn arrived with two of her best associates and began building a case to counter the CPS complaint. Jonathan's private investigator confirmed what he'd suspected. The anonymous tip had come from a burner phone purchased by one of Preston Ward's former executives. It was retaliation, pure and simple, but proving that wouldn't matter if the social worker found legitimate concerns. So Jonathan did what he did best. He mobilized resources. A team of contractors was dispatched to Nia's apartment with orders to fix everything. The heating, the mold, the leaking pipes, the cracked windows. He didn't ask permission. He just made it happen. A pediatrician was hired to conduct a comprehensive health assessment of Zara, documenting that she was healthy, well-nourished, and showed no signs of neglect or abuse. Character witnesses were lined up. Mr. Lawton, Chef Marcus, other staff members who could attest to Nia's dedication as a mother and worker. By the time Ms. Patterson returned at 4 that afternoon, this time with a police officer for backup, Jonathan was ready. I have documentation, he said calmly, handing her a leather folder. Medical records showing Zara's excellent health. Statements from staff confirming her mother's attentiveness. And evidence that this complaint was filed by individuals connected to a criminal enterprise that was recently exposed. Ms. Patterson reviewed the documents carefully, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. I still need to speak with the child. With her mother present. Agreed. They gathered in the library. Nia, Zara, Ms. Patterson, Jonathan, and Evelyn. Zara sat close to her mother, her small hand gripping Nia's tightly. Ms. Patterson's voice softened when she addressed the child. Zara, I'm Ms. Patterson. I just want to ask you a few questions. You're not in trouble, okay? Zara nodded silently. Do you feel safe here? In this house? Yes. Has anyone ever hurt you? Or scared you here? No. Mr. Jonathan is nice. He gave me food when I was hungry. He lets me look at his computers. What about a home? Do you have enough food there? Is your room warm enough? Zara's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes it's cold, and sometimes Mama gives me her food because we don't have enough. But she loves me so much. She works really hard. Please don't take me away from her. The raw fear in the child's voice affected even Ms. Patterson. She cleared her throat and made notes on her clipboard. No one's taking you anywhere, she said gently. Then to Nia, Mrs. Carter. Ms. Carter, Nia corrected quietly. Ms. Carter, I can see that your daughter is well loved and cared for. However, the housing situation is concerning. Children need stable, safe environments. The apartment is being fully renovated as we speak, Jonathan interjected. Every issue will be addressed within the week. Ms. Patterson looked at him skeptically. That's very convenient timing. Yes, it is, because I should have done it sooner. Jonathan's voice was firm. Ms. Carter is a valued employee. I failed to ensure she had appropriate housing. That's on me, not her. Mr. Hale, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this kind of intervention raises its own concerns. There needs to be appropriate boundaries between employer and employee. Then let me be clear about the boundaries. Jonathan stood, his presence commanding. Ms. Carter works for me. Her daughter's welfare matters to me because her mother's well-being matters to me. I'm not doing anything inappropriate. I'm simply ensuring that the people who work in my home have what they need to thrive. If that's concerning to you, Then I suggest you investigate every other billionaire in this city and see how they treat their staff. Evelyn hid a slight smile. Her brother had found his moral high ground and was defending it ferociously. Ms. Patterson closed her folder. I'm going to recommend this case be closed with no action. However, I'll be scheduling a follow-up visit in 30 days to ensure the housing improvements have been completed and that the child continues to be in a safe, stable environment. That's acceptable, Evelyn said smoothly. We'll provide full documentation of all improvements. After they left, the library filled with stunned silence. Then Zara burst into tears, and Nia pulled her daughter close, sobbing with relief. Jonathan watched them, something tight unwinding in his chest. They were safe. For now. But as he stood there, watching Nia rock her daughter and whisper reassurances, he realized something that had been building for days. This wasn't just about protecting them anymore. This wasn't just about easing his conscience or making up for his childhood trauma. Somewhere in the past week, Nia and Zara had become his family. The family he'd never had. The family he'd never thought he wanted. And he would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. Later that evening, after Nia and Zara had gone home to find their apartment transformed by an army of contractors, Jonathan sat in his study with Evelyn. You know what you're doing, right? His sister asked quietly. What do you mean? You're building a life around them. Around Nia and her daughter. And if they leave, if something happens, you're going to be destroyed. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. I know, and you're doing it anyway. Yes. Evelyn shook her head, but she was smiling. Well, at least you're finally living. That's more than you've done in 20 years. After she left, Jonathan opened his desk drawer and looked at the 2 drawings Zara had given him. The simple figures at the table. The man protecting the child from darkness. He'd spent his entire adult life avoiding connection because it meant vulnerability. But vulnerability, he was learning, also meant joy. It meant purpose. It meant having something worth protecting. His phone buzzed with a text from Nia. Thank you. For everything. I don't have word for what you did today. Jonathan typed back. You don't need words. Just promise me you'll let me help when you need it. Her response came quickly. I promise. Good night, Jonathan. Good night, Nia. He sat in his empty office, surrounded by evidence of his success. But for the first time, success felt like more than just numbers and acquisitions. It felt like making sure a little girl never had to hide under a counter to eat. It felt like standing between a mother and a broken system that wanted to tear them apart. It felt like family. And Jonathan Hale, the man who'd built walls around his heart for decades, was finally ready to let them fall. 3 weeks had passed since the CPS investigation, and the mansion had transformed in ways that went beyond the physical. Jonathan found himself structuring his days differently now, making sure he was available when Nia arrived in the morning, finding excuses to check on Zara when she visited after school. The child had started spending more time at the estate, doing homework in the library or quietly observing Jonathan's work when he allowed it. The change hadn't gone unnoticed. Staff members whispered about it in the kitchen. Evelyn commented on it every time she visited. Even Mr. Lawton, the ever-silent butler, had offered Jonathan a knowing smile that suggested he approved of whatever was happening. What was happening remained undefined. Jonathan and Nia existed in a strange space between employer and employee, between protector and protected, between something that felt dangerously close to family and the reality that kept them separated by wealth, race, and social expectations. But the 30-day CPS follow-up was approaching, and Jonathan had called an emergency meeting with his executive team. Not about business, about something far more important. The conference room was filled with his top executives, all looking confused about why they'd been summoned on a Saturday morning. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, Evelyn beside him for legal support. I'm implementing new company policies effective immediately, Jonathan announced without preamble. First, we're establishing a comprehensive employee welfare program. No more food waste. All excess will be donated to local shelters. Staff children will have access to safe study areas and childcare on premises. Full educational scholarships for employee families who qualify. The room was silent with shock. These weren't typical corporate initiatives. Second, Jonathan continued, I want a full audit of our employee compensation packages. If anyone working for Hale Industries is struggling to afford housing or food, then we're failing as an employer. I want that fixed. Sir, one executive ventured carefully. These programs will cost millions annually. Then we'll spend millions annually. I'm not negotiating on this. Jonathan's tone left no room for argument. We've been posting record profits while people who work for us skip meals. That ends today. The executives exchanged glances but nodded. When Jonathan Hale made a decision with that tone, resistance was futile. After the meeting, Evelyn walked with him back to his study. You know the board is going to question this. They'll want to know why you suddenly care about employee welfare. Let them question it. I don't need their approval for everything. No, but you're making decisions based on emotion rather than business strategy. That's not like you. Evelyn paused. Or rather, it wasn't like you. Before them. Jonathan didn't deny it. The old way was profitable but hollow. This feels right. It is right. I'm just making sure you understand what you're risking. If the board thinks you're compromised, I'm compromised, Jonathan admitted. And I don't care. Evelyn smiled. Good. It's about time. That afternoon, Jonathan was reviewing the new policy documents when his head of security called. The tone in Marcus's voice immediately set off alarms. Sir, we have a situation. 2 of your board members just left the mansion. Our surveillance caught them discussing something concerning in the parking area. What did they say? They mentioned reaching out to Preston Ward's former associates. Something about providing information that could be useful in ongoing investigations. And they specifically mentioned Ms. Carter and her daughter. Jonathan's blood went cold. Play me the audio. The recording was damning. 2 executives, Stephen Blake and Richard Morrison, discussing how they could leverage information about Jonathan's inappropriate attachment to his maid and her child to force him out as CEO. They planned to paint him as emotionally unstable, compromised, possibly even engaged in something improper. They're trying to stage a coup, Evelyn said when Jonathan played her the recording. Use your relationship with Nia and Zara against you. Then we fire them immediately. It's not that simple. They're on the board. You need majority vote to remove board members, and if they've been recruiting support, you might not have it. Evelyn's expression was grave. Jonathan, they're going to make this ugly. They'll drag Nia and Zara through public scrutiny, imply inappropriate conduct, possibly even trigger another CPS investigation with more serious allegations. I won't let that happen. You might not have a choice. If they go public with their concerns, the media will run with it. Billionaire and his maid. It's the kind of story that sells regardless of truth. Jonathan stood at his window, his hands clenched into fists. He defeated Preston Ward. He protected Nia and Zara from CPS. But now the threat was coming from inside his own company, from men he'd trusted with corporate decisions. We need to move first, he said finally, before they can act. Ow! Call an emergency board meeting. Monday morning. I'm going to force a vote of confidence. If they want me out, let them try to remove me openly rather than through sabotage. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's risky. If you lose. If I lose, I lose. But at least I'll go down fighting for something that matters. Sunday evening, Jonathan was working late in his study when he heard the security alarm chime. Someone was at the front gate. The camera showed Nia's old sedan, and his heart immediately knew something was wrong. She never came to the mansion outside work hours. He met her at the door. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wild with panic. She's gone, Nia gasped. Zara's gone. I can't find her anywhere. Jonathan's world tilted. What happened? Tell me everything. We were at the apartment. I was doing laundry. She said she was going to read in her room. When I checked on her 20 minutes later, she was gone. The window was open. I've been driving around for an hour looking for her, calling her name, checking everywhere she might go. I called the police, but they said to wait, that she probably just wandered off and will come back. But she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't just leave. Something's wrong. I know it. Jonathan was already pulling out his phone. Marcus, initiate full security protocol. Zara Carter is missing. 8-year-old black female, last seen wearing. He looked at Nia. Pink hoodie, jeans, white sneakers, Nia supplied, her voice breaking. I want every camera in the city accessed. Pull traffic footage, security feeds, everything. And give me the GPS data from any devices connected to." He stopped. "Does she have a phone?" "No. She's 8. I can't afford." Nia's face crumpled. "Oh God. She's out there alone, and I can't even track her phone because she doesn't have one. We'll find her." Jonathan gripped Nia's shoulders. "I promise you, we will find her. I'm mobilizing every resource I have." Within minutes, the mansion became a command center. Security personnel fanned out across the city. Private investigators were activated. Jonathan even called in favors from city officials to access municipal camera systems. Evelyn arrived 30 minutes later, having heard the news. She found Jonathan and Nia in his study, surrounded by computer screens showing different camera feeds. "Any leads?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing yet." She vanished. Jonathan's voice was tight with controlled panic. An 8-year-old child doesn't just disappear without a trace. Someone took her. "You think this is connected to the board members? Blake and Morrison?" "I don't know, but the timing is suspicious." Nia sat hunched in a chair, her arms wrapped around herself. "This is my fault. I should have been watching her more carefully. I should have." "Stop." Jonathan knelt in front of her. "This is not your fault. You're a good mother. The best. Whatever happened, we will fix it." His phone rang. "Marcus." "Sir, we found something." Traffic camera caught a vehicle near Ms. Carter's apartment around the time Zara disappeared. Black SUV, tinted windows, no plates. It stopped on her street for approximately 3 minutes, then left heading east. That's not random. Someone was waiting for her. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Where did the vehicle go?" "We tracked it to the industrial district near the old Riverside warehouse complex. Then we lost it." Jonathan was already standing. "Give me a car. Full security team." "Jonathan, wait." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "If someone took her, this could be dangerous. Let law enforcement." "There's no time. Every second she's out there is another second she's terrified." He turned to Nia. "Stay here. I'll bring her back." "No." Nia stood, her fear replaced by fierce determination. "She's my daughter. I'm coming with you." There was no arguing with her. Jonathan nodded. The drive to the industrial district was tense and silent. Jonathan's security team followed in 2 additional vehicles. Rain had started falling, heavy and cold, turning the abandoned warehouses into shadowy, ominous shapes against the dark sky. There, Marcus pointed to fresh tire tracks in the mud, leading to one of the larger buildings. "Someone's been here recently." They approached carefully, weapons drawn. The warehouse door was partially open. Inside, dim light filtered through broken windows. And then Jonathan heard it, a small, frightened voice. "Let me go. Please. I want my mama. Zara." Jonathan moved before anyone could stop him, pushing through the door into the warehouse. In the center of the vast space, illuminated by a single hanging work light, stood Richard Morrison. And beside him, trembling and crying, was Zara. "Well," Morrison said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "The night arrives to save the day. How predictable. Let her go." Jonathan's voice was deadly calm. "Now, why would I do that? She's leverage. You sign over your controlling shares of Hale Industries, transfer them to Blake and me, and the girl goes home safely. You kidnapped a child." Evelyn had entered behind Jonathan, her phone out. "We have you on camera. We have recordings. You're finished." "Am I? Or am I the concerned board member who rescued a child from an inappropriate situation? Who protected an innocent from a billionaire's questionable obsession with his maid?" Morrison smiled coldly. "The story can go many ways, depending on who tells it." Nia pushed past security and into the warehouse. When Zara saw her, she burst into fresh tears. "Mama." "Don't move, Ms. Carter." Morrison had pulled Zara closer to him. The child was sobbing now, terrified. "This can end simply. Hale signs the papers, everyone goes home. Force my hand, and this gets very complicated." Jonathan's mind raced through scenarios. Morrison was desperate and cornered. Desperate people made catastrophic decisions. But before he could formulate a plan, a new voice cut through the tension. "I don't think so." Mr. Lawton stepped into the light, moving with surprising swiftness for a man his age. In his hand was a thick folder. "Mr. Lawton?" Jonathan stared at his butler. "What are you?" "I've served the Hale family for 40 years, Lawton said calmly. "In that time, I've seen many things, learned many secrets." He held up the folder, including the rather interesting details of Mr. Morrison's offshore accounts, falsified expense reports, an embezzlement scheme that's been ongoing for 6 years. Morrison's face went white. "That's privileged information. You can't." "I can and I have. It's already been delivered to the appropriate authorities." Lawton's voice was steel. "Release the child, or I'll ensure every illegal transaction you've made is public by morning." For a moment, Morrison looked like he might refuse. Then sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the police. "This isn't over," Morrison snarled, but he released Zara. She ran immediately to her mother. Nia collapsed to her knees, gathering her daughter into her arms and sobbing with relief. Jonathan moved to shield them both as his security team moved in to restrain Morrison. The police arrived minutes later. Morrison was arrested on kidnapping charges, with additional financial crimes pending. Blake, his co-conspirator, was picked up at his home within the hour. Through it all, Jonathan kept one eye on Nia and Zara. They sat together on a bench outside the warehouse, Nia holding her daughter like she'd never let go, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets provided by the paramedics. When the initial chaos settled, Jonathan approached them carefully. "Are you hurt?" he asked Zara gently. She shook her head, her face buried against her mother's shoulder. "I'm so sorry this happened. I should have seen it coming. Should have protected you better." Nia looked up at him, her eyes red from crying but clear with understanding. "You found her. You brought her back. That's what matters. I almost lost her." Jonathan's voice cracked. "I almost lost both of you because people wanted to hurt me. But you didn't lose us." Nia reached out and took his hand. "We're here. We're safe. Because of you." The drive back to the mansion was quiet. Zara fell asleep in the car, exhausted from fear and relief. Nia held her daughter close, and Jonathan found himself reaching across the seat to rest his hand on Nia's shoulder. She leaned into the touch, and something fundamental shifted between them. They weren't employer and employee anymore. They weren't even just protector and protected. They were family. The word that had terrified Jonathan for decades now felt like the most natural thing in the world. The sun was rising by the time they arrived back at the estate. Jonathan had already arranged for guest rooms to be prepared. There was no way he was letting either of them return to the apartment alone after what had happened. "You'll stay here," he said, and it wasn't a question, "until we know you're completely safe." Nia nodded, too exhausted to argue. She carried Zara upstairs, and Jonathan watched them go, something warm and fierce burning in his chest. Evelyn found him standing in the hallway, staring after them. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "You're responsible for them now. Not legally, not professionally. Actually responsible, as in your life is permanently entangled with theirs." Evelyn's expression was soft. "My brother has been dead inside for years. You didn't fix him. Your daughter did. She's not my daughter. Isn't she?" In all the ways that matter. Jonathan couldn't answer that, because the truth was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. The following weeks brought dramatic changes. Morrison and Blake were formally removed from the board and faced criminal charges. Jonathan's new employee welfare programs were implemented to widespread positive press, and the CPS follow-up visit went smoothly, with Nia's apartment fully renovated and Zara clearly thriving. Ms. Patterson closed the case permanently. But the biggest change was the one that happened quietly in the spaces between official business and public scrutiny. Nia and Zara never moved back to the apartment. Not officially, not with any formal declaration. It just happened gradually. A few nights became a week. A week became 2. Suddenly, Zara had her own room at the mansion, decorated with books and art supplies Jonathan had quietly purchased. Nia's belongings appeared in the guest suite, and dinner became something they shared together. Jonathan, Nia, Zara, and often Evelyn and Mr. Lawton. The table that had once symbolized Jonathan's isolation now felt full. One evening, about a month after the kidnapping, Jonathan found Zara in his study. She was sitting at his desk, carefully drawing something on a large piece of paper. "What are you working on?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "A picture. For you." She held up proudly. It showed three figures standing in front of the mansion. A tall man with dark hair, a woman with warm eyes, and a small girl between them, holding both their hands. Above them, she'd written in careful letters, "My family." Jonathan felt his throat tighten. "It's beautiful. Do you like it?" "I love it." He paused, then asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Zara, do you know what family means?" "It's people who love each other, who take care of each other." She tilted her head. "Like you and me and Mama." "That's exactly right." Jonathan took a deep breath. "How would you feel about that being permanent? About this being your home? For real, not just visiting?" Zara's eyes went wide. "Forever. If you want it to be. I want it." She threw her arms around his neck with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of a child who'd found something she'd been missing without knowing it. "I want to stay forever." Jonathan held her carefully, this small person who'd somehow broken through decades of walls, and reminded him what it meant to be human. "Then you will. I promise." Later that night, after Zara was asleep, Jonathan found Nia in the garden. She stood among the roses, looking up at the stars. "She showed me the drawing," Jonathan said quietly. "The one of our family." Nia turned to him. "She's been saying that word a lot lately. Family. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it." "How do I feel about being considered family by an 8-year-old who's taught me more about being human than 4 decades of life experience?" Jonathan moved closer. "Honored. Terrified. Grateful." "I never expected this," Nia admitted. "When I took this job, I just needed income. I needed to provide for my daughter. I never imagined." She gestured at the mansion at him. "This. Any of this. Neither did I. I thought I had everything figured out. Money, success, control. Turns out I had nothing that actually mattered. And now I have you and Zara. And that's worth more than everything else combined." Nia's eyes glistened with tears. "Are you sure about this? About us staying?" "People will talk. They already are. A white billionaire and his black maid raising a child together. It doesn't fit any neat categories." "Good. I spent my whole life fitting into categories that made me miserable. I'm done with that." Jonathan took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I'm not asking for romance or obligation or gratitude. I'm just asking if you'll let me be part of your family. Let me help raise Zara. Let me be there for both of you. What if it doesn't work? What if we're too different from 2 different worlds? Then we'll figure it out. Together." He squeezed her hands gently. "Nia, I can't promise perfect, but I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you and Zara have placed in me." Nia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the moonlight. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll stay. We'll be a family. Whatever that looks like." Jonathan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Whatever that looks like. The following morning, Jonathan made an announcement that shocked the business world. He was establishing the Hale Foundation, a nonprofit focused on supporting single parents, funding education for underprivileged children, and addressing food insecurity. Nia would serve as executive director, with full authority and a substantial salary that reflected her value rather than just her role. "You're making me the face of your foundation?" Nia had asked when he'd first proposed it. "I'm giving you the platform you deserve. You understand these issues because you've lived them. That makes you more qualified than anyone. But people will say, let them say whatever they want. I'm done caring about people who'd rather maintain comfortable hierarchies than create actual change." The foundation launched to immediate impact. Stories appeared in the media, not about scandal or inappropriate relationships, but about meaningful change. About a billionaire who'd actually listened to someone from a different world and let it transform him. Riverside Preparatory accepted Zara with a full scholarship, not because of Jonathan's influence, but because her test scores and interview revealed a child with exceptional potential. She started classes that fall, thriving in an environment that finally challenged her brilliant mind. And through it all, the three of them built something that didn't fit any traditional definition. Not quite romance between Jonathan and Nia, though something deeper than friendship had definitely formed. Not quite traditional family, though Zara called Jonathan by his first name with the easy affection of a child who knew she was loved. They were simply theirs, a family built not on blood or legal documents, but on choice and care and the radical decision to let love take whatever form it needed. One evening, 6 months after that first moment in the kitchen when Jonathan had found a small girl hiding with a plate of leftovers, they gathered for dinner. The formal dining room had been abandoned in favor of the smaller, cozier breakfast room. Mr. Lawton served the meal with his usual quiet efficiency, but there was a smile on his weathered face. "Mr. Jonathan," Zara said between bites, "I learned something new in school today." "What's that?" "My teacher said families come in all different shapes. Some have a mom and a dad. Some have just a mom. Some have 2 dads or 2 moms. And some," she looked around the table with satisfaction, "have a mom and a friend who's like a dad, but not really, but kind of." Nia laughed, the sound warm and free. "That's one way to describe it. Is that okay?" Zara asked Jonathan seriously. "That you're like a dad, but not really, but kind of?" Jonathan felt emotion rise in his throat. He looked at this child who'd somehow become the center of his world, who'd taught him that love didn't need qualifications or categories. "That's more than okay," he said softly. "That's perfect." Zara beamed and returned to her dinner, satisfied. Nia caught Jonathan's eye across the table, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words. They'd all been hungry once, for food, for connection, for belonging. Now, sitting together at a table that had once known only loneliness, they were full. Not because of wealth or status or any external measure of success, but because they'd found each other, and that, Jonathan had learned, was the only thing that truly mattered. Later that night, Jonathan stood in his study, looking at the wall where he'd hung Zara's drawings. All 3 of them. The first showing people at a table, the second showing him as a protector, the third showing a family holding hands. Below them, he'd hung a frame containing a simple quote he'd found: "Family isn't always blood. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs. The ones who accept you for who you are." Nia appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. She passed him one and stood beside him, looking at the drawings. "She really loves you," Nia said quietly. "I really love her. Both of you." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and watching through the window as the stars appeared in the darkening sky. Outside, the world continued with all its complexity and challenges. But inside, in this house that had once been a museum of isolation, there was warmth. There was laughter. There was family. And Jonathan Hale, who'd spent decades running from connection, had finally come home. When was the last time you let someone pass the walls you've built around your heart, even knowing it might cost you everything you've worked for? If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the unexpected connections that change our lives forever.